I was going to say, Lori, there's an asymmetry. Everyone agrees higher education is important, and almost no one wants to pay for it. And part of it is an aging demographic. I mean, if you think of the priorities, and I'm not against any of these things, but we have, pharmaceuticals for the elderly, we have Social Security, we have Medicare and Medicaid, and lock up the bad guys and things like that. So the shine isn't quite on higher ed the way it was in the 50s. There are competing priorities, and the competing priorities increasingly get resolved by an electorate that is increasingly aging, even though we have a booming Latino population and so forth. So I think that's part of the problem. And part of it's a certain skepticism that sort of, we changed, why don't you? You do it the way you did in 1878, even before Niels was president. And you do it the same old way, we don't do it that way at Lockheed, and we don't do it that way in the airline business and so forth and so on. But it's very different. I mean, it's a labor-intensive education is an unusual type of public good.
The research university is a different beast. It's a unique American beast, pretty much, and it talks about research, but it does not neglect teaching. And in fact, the synergy of teaching and research is what makes it very, very special. It's sort of obvious in the fields where a lot of research is going on that bringing into the classroom somebody who's excitedly involved in current research is an important thing. In certain fields like engineering, where the world has changed over 20 or 30 years, if you don't have that kind of person in the classroom, you really lose something. But it's equally important to recognize how research is helped by teaching.
Yes.
I used to, Eric will appreciate this, I used to say that the only way you can understand thermodynamics is to take it twice and teach it once.
And Ken turned out to be right, actually.
There are insights that come from that. And in fact, undergraduate teaching is much more stimulating in that respect than graduate teaching, because we've already indoctrinated the graduate students to speak in our jargon. The undergraduates will tell you they don't understand what you're talking about. Maybe you ought to rethink what you're talking about. So that's a very important aspect of it.
As you think about a state budget as a pie, you've got a health and human services piece, you've got a K through 12 piece, and those grow. Well, pies being uniformly round, that may not be true, but this pie is, the slice that's left for everything else gets squeezed. So our story needs to be told and actuated in the sense that the way to stop growing the healthcare cost is actually to invest in research and in education of healthcare providers in ways that they're operating at their highest proficiency in devices and drugs are developed that limit morbidity and mortality. And so that the inextricable link between what a research university does and its role in healthcare, and of course its role in creating effective teachers and helping close the achievement gap, it just can't be overstated. It's at the heart of almost everything that's good for the state of Minnesota.
The idea that the universities of the nation were going to be the research arm of the federal government, of the nation, that idea came about in 1945 when Vannevar Bush wrote his famous report, where he was a scientific counselor to the President of the United States. And he said the federal government should invest in our research universities as the research arm of the federal government. And since then, we have seen this enormous growth in federal investment in the universities, which has been incredibly productive. Not only has it, led to much of the prosperity that we see in this nation and some of the social change, but it has been a model for the world. I come from a somewhat different perspective because I started in another country. And why did my generation look to America to come for our education after we had finished university education in, for example, Sweden? We came here because the notion was that in America you had the best higher education system in the world, and that you had research being conducted in a context where you also had a broad spectrum of teaching. And today we have, what do we see in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and in China? They are investing massively in their research universities. And by the way, they're doing it on something that to me looks suspiciously like the land-grant model, research, teaching, and service. And they may be outflanking us if we do not continue to make that investment in what really was an American invention, the research university combined with teaching and service.
Whether we like it or not, and people have different perspectives, this is kind of last time I checked, a capitalist business society. We have a lot of businesses. They're not all good, but some of them are really quite good and pretty good. And in my experience, it's possible to develop collaborative relationships with business that is a win for the business and a win for the university in all kinds of ways, including generating resources, and it can be done without compromising the fundamental freedom essential for a university to pursue truth, to teach it, to argue, and to discuss. It can be done without selling your soul, in my judgment, and I think it's got to be done unless somebody has some magical formula as to how we're going to snap our fingers and get a lot more money. I don't think it's going to happen.
We need a more sensible conversation about debt, student debt. Mm-hmm. The student debt conversation is totally wrong as you read it in the public press. It makes no difference that student debt is equal to $1.2 trillion like credit cards. Credit cards are for short-term purposes. Education is a lifetime investment. That's a trivial kind of comparison. And if we don't get beyond that, we'll never get to the sensible conversation that I think we need as a country. The debt that students have today is no different in terms of the burden they feel in repaying that debt than it was a generation ago. And that's not reported in the press, but it is reported in some very, very powerful analyses by the Brookings Institution.
Bob?
But I wanted to bring the point to the fact that we've talked about our research and our teaching and our outreach, but we haven't talked a lot about the social responsibility that this institution has, frankly, to civilization, for our ability to create humanists and artists and musicians who make life worth living, for our ability to educate students to know about themselves and understand the world that they're in and the history that got them to where they are today. So that portion of a liberal education, which all of our graduates get in some measure or another, is centrally important, and it often gets overlooked in the conversation about industry and medicine and infrastructure. But at the core, that educational component is critical for us, and it's critical for our society and frankly for our civilization. And that value is in danger of being eroded away as a consequence of all of the hits we've been taking.
I think you're